Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for something a little different today?
Oh, yeah.
We're diving into a topic that, honestly, when I first saw it, I was like, huh, okay. But the more I read about it, the more fascinating it got.
Definitely an unexpected connection.
We're going deep into the world of 1970s nunsploitation films. And,
Buckle up.
yeah, buckle up. And how those
Those
films,
are wild.
they are wild. How those films actually connect to,
Surprisingly relevant.
yes, to our modern anxieties about artificial intelligence.
It's going to be a good one.
I'm excited. I have to admit, though, when I first heard the term nunsploitation, I kind of drew a blank.
Yeah, I can see that.
So for those of us who, maybe haven't spent a lot of time in this particular cinematic world,
It's a niche genre for sure.
can you give us a quick rundown of what we're talking about here?
Sure, yeah. So imagine you're taking like religious settings, usually convents, and you're mixing them with elements of horror and, transgression.
Okay.
That's nunsploitation in a nutshell. Really a subgenre of exploitation cinema that had its heyday in the 1970s.
Okay.
Primarily coming out of Italy and Spain.
So not exactly a
Well,
lighthearted family fare.
Not your average feel-good movie, no.
No, not really.
Yeah.
Are there any, classic titles from that era that really kind of exemplify what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple that immediately come to mind.
Okay.
So Flavia the Heretic from 1974
Okay.
and The Other Hell, which came out a bit later in 1981.
Right.
Both of those really capture the essence of nunsploitation, and they use these really exaggerated and often very surreal storylines to basically critique religious institutions.
Interesting. So they weren't just straight up horror.
Yeah.
They had this layer of social commentary.
Exactly. And they were tapping into all these anxieties of the time, things like hysteria, repression, even supernatural elements. And then you add in the visuals, super striking, things like high contrast lighting and very elaborate period costumes, that Baroque set design that really just amplified that kind of dramatic and often unsettling tone.
Yeah, I can see that.
It all works together to create a unique aesthetic.
Very cool. Okay, so that gives us a good sense of the films themselves. But I have to ask, how do we get from, convents and gothic horror to,
Yeah.
how do we get to AI?
The world of artificial intelligence?
That's the question, isn't it?
It seems like a pretty big leap.
It is a big leap. And that's what makes this so interesting, right? Because even though the setting of these films might seem pretty dated, convents and habits and all that, the core themes, I mean, when you think about it, critiques of institutional power, societal anxieties, rebellion, those are all things that are just as relevant today as they were back then,
Absolutely.
if not more so.
I can totally see that. So instead of the church,
Right.
it's like now we have these tech giants, Google and Meta.
Yeah, the new convents. Exactly. These massive corporations that a lot of people see as wielding way too much power and influence.
And that sense of being watched, controlled, that was so strong in those nunsploitation films.
Right.
Well, guess what? That's back in a big way, but now it's not nuns peering through windows.
Yeah. And
It's algorithms.
it's our phones listening to us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Digital surveillance has basically taken over.
Okay. Yeah, that is a
A little creepy, right?
little creepy when you put it that way. And then you add in this idea that,
AI is the authority figure.
AI is
Kind of
becoming
a new church.
kind of.
Yeah, it's pretty unsettling.
I mean, just look at all the headlines about what AI can do, what it might be able to do.
Right, right.
It's easy to feel like, are we really in control here?
I think that's a question a lot of people are asking.
It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a huge question. But is it too simplistic to compare, our anxieties about AI to, this really complex relationship people have with religious institutions? I mean,
I don't think so. I mean, it's definitely complex.
yeah. But that's what makes it so interesting to explore, right? And one of the sources we looked at had this great phrase. They talked about digital asceticism versus technological excess. And I think that just perfectly captures
Interesting.
this tension that we're all dealing with, On the one hand, you have people who are like, nope, I'm off the grid. Give me my flip phone. I'm done with social media.
Yeah.
That's digital asceticism, right? This rejection of all the excess. But then on the other hand, you have so many of us who are just diving headfirst into every new gadget and app, constantly connected.
I think we all fall somewhere on that spectrum.
Yeah, we're all figuring it out as we go.
Exactly. Just like the characters in those nunsploitation films, they were all trying to figure out,
Their relationship with the church.
how to
Yeah.
navigate this really complicated system.
And we're doing the same thing with technology.
Totally. But Okay, I'm curious. How does AI art fit into all of this? Because I've seen some of that stuff online,
Yeah.
and it can be pretty bizarre.
That's where things get really interesting. Because AI art, with its often unsettling aesthetic,
Okay.
it's reflecting those same anxieties that we've been talking about, those kind of characteristic distortions you see, warped hands, uncanny facial expressions, bodies that seem to be kind of melting or morphing in strange
Yeah,
ways.
it's not just like, oh, that's a weird picture. It's like,
Yet it's more than that.
whoa, this is freaking me out a little bit.
It's unsettling, and it's not random. I mean, art historians call this the grotesque.
The grotesque. Okay, so now I'm thinking gargoyles and medieval art.
Right. It's that same vibe, but updated.
Yeah, okay.
Because the grotesque, it's a visual language for expressing these deep-seated societal anxieties.
Oh, I see.
And AI art, with its distorted imagery, it's tapping into that language, reflecting our unease about technology's impact on our lives.
So you're saying that those weird hands, those unsettling faces in AI art, that could actually be like
Visual metaphors.
for our very real fears about being replaced by AI.
Exactly. It's like AI is holding up this distorted mirror and reflecting back our deepest anxieties about the future. And if we look closer at those specific distortions,
Okay.
like those warped hands, for example, what do you think those symbolize?
Well, if you think about what hands represent, action, creation, control,
Right.
it's almost like those distorted hands are symbolizing our fear of losing control.
That
Like
using our grip.
literally. And then figuratively being manipulated by algorithms.
I like that. That's really insightful.
Oh, wow. Thanks. This is getting really interesting, actually. Speaking of unsettling things,
Yeah.
the source material also talked about noise music being used as a soundtrack.
Oh, yeah. That's another piece of this puzzle. Because noise music, with its rejection of traditional harmony and order, it might seem like a strange addition at first, but
Sure, I could see that.
But it actually reflects that same disruption and rebellion that's at the heart of both those Nunsploitation films and our anxieties about AI.
Okay. Yeah, I'm ready to unpack that.
Let's do it.
But first, we need to take a quick break to gather our thoughts. We'll be right back to explore how noise music adds another layer to this fascinating connection between 1970s Nunsploitation films and our modern anxieties about AI.
Sounds good.
All right, we're back, and I'm ready to dive into this whole noise music connection.
Yeah, let's get noisy.
I have to admit, it still feels like a bit of a stretch.
I get it, but when you really think about it, noise music, it's like it's intentionally challenging our expectations of what music should be, right? Like it's breaking the rules.
Yeah, that's a good point. And AI is definitely challenging our understanding of intelligence.
Exactly. Pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible.
And control, right.
Absolutely. Noise music, it's often, well, it can be jarring.
Yeah, for sure.
Chaotic, even a little painful to listen to sometimes. It's intentionally disrupting that familiar, comfortable order.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely see that. Some of the noise music I've heard is definitely not something I would put on for a relaxing evening.
Exactly. It's meant to shake things up. And that disruption, that challenging of norms, that's key here. Remember how we talked about those Nunsploitation films, using these like shocking images to critique our structures? Well, noise music, it's like the sonic equivalent. It's reflecting that same sense of unease, that rebellion against authority.
So it's like noise music is the soundtrack to the breakdown of order,
Yes,
both in those films and in our digital world.
that's a great way to put it. And this whole idea of sonic disruption, it's even more powerful when you think about our world of constant digital information. I mean, we are bombarded with notifications, updates, news feeds. It never stops.
It really doesn't. You're right. It's like a constant barrage of noise.
Exactly, both literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah, now that you mention it, it really does feel like our digital lives are becoming this kind of noise music composition
I like that.
full of unpredictable rhythms and jarring interruptions and
That's a really insightful connection. And just as noise music can be this form of rebellion against those traditional musical structures,
Yeah.
it can also be seen as a form of resistance against the control that algorithms have in our lives. It's like saying, I won't conform to your neatly curated playlists and predictable algorithms.
I embrace the chaos.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming some of that agency.
That's powerful. Okay, so we've got the visual parallels with the grotesque in AI art,
Right.
and now this sonic connection with noise music. But let's go back to those distorted images for a second. You mentioned that we could, unpack even more specific anxieties by looking closer
Yeah,
at those AI-generated distortions. We talked about the hands,
right.
but what about those, like, uncanny facial expression?
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
those blank stares, those slightly off smiles.
Yeah.
What do you think those represent?
I think those tap into our anxieties about authenticity because we're living in a world of deepfakes and filters where online especially, it's getting harder and harder to tell what's real and what's fake.
Totally. And we're constantly being bombarded with images that have been manipulated.
Right, exactly. So those unsettling AI faces, they're capturing this growing sense of unease that a lot of us feel.
About identity and truth in the digital age.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can we trust what we see anymore?
Exactly. It's a valid question.
What about those AI images where, like, bodies are merged or features are, like, multiplied? I've seen some really strange stuff, extra limbs, faces with multiple eyes.
Yeah, those are interesting.
What do you think those represent?
I think those point to our anxieties about the blurring lines between human and machine intelligence. AI is getting so advanced, it's capable of learning and creating, and it's only going to get more sophisticated. And it makes you wonder, where does the human end and the machine begin?
That's a big question. What happens when that line gets so blurry we can't even tell the difference anymore?
Right. It's a little unsettling, isn't it?
I have to admit, that is a question that keeps me up at night sometimes. It's both fascinating and frightening.
It is. It really is. And these AI images with their impossible anatomies and these hybrid forms, they're giving visual expression to that very real tension that a lot of us feel.
So we have these visual anxieties, right, being manifested in AI art,
Right.
and then this sonic representation of chaos and rebellion.
In the noise music.
Yeah, it's like these seemingly disparate elements are coming together to create this cultural commentary on our relationship with technology.
And what's so interesting is that it's all happening organically, It's not like someone sat down and said, let's use AI art and noise music to critique technology.
Right. It's like it's emerging naturally from the culture.
Exactly. It's this collective expression of anxiety that's finding its voice through these unexpected channels.
What really strikes me is that this goes way beyond just understanding a niche film genre or the latest trends in art and music. It's about understanding ourselves and how we're grappling with this world that's changing so rapidly around us.
That's exactly what makes this so fascinating to explore. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, is there a specific takeaway that you want listeners to walk away with?
What's really resonating with me is that those Nunsploitation films, with their extreme scenarios and all that unsettling imagery,
Right. It's like they were ahead of their time in a way.
they were grappling with these themes of power, control, and rebellion.
Yeah, they were holding a mirror up to society.
And those themes are even more relevant today in this context of, the rise of technology.
Yeah.
So those unsettling elements in AI art, in noise music, it's like they're doing the same thing for us now.
I think you're right. They're grabbing our attention. They're making us pay attention to these uncomfortable truths about technology that we might otherwise just ignore.
They're like a wake-up call, right?
Yeah.
Urging us to be more critical, more aware of how we're engaging with the digital world.
Exactly. And it's not about rejecting technology. It's about approaching it with a critical eye, with a little healthy skepticism.
With a willingness to question those assumptions that we often make about progress and innovation.
Absolutely.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. We started with this seemingly niche film genre from the 1970s, and we've ended up exploring these huge questions about technology, power, and what it even means to be human in this digital age.
It's amazing where these unexpected connections can take us, right? Because it's often in those unexpected connections that we find the most profound insights.
Well said.
Yeah.
And to our expert, thank you so much for guiding us through this fascinating and honestly kind of mind-bending exploration. I know we'll be thinking about this for a long time.
It was my pleasure. These are conversations that we need to be having.
And all of you listening out there, keep those minds open, keep questioning, and keep exploring those unexpected corners of the digital world, because you never know what fascinating connections you might uncover. Until next time, this is The Deep Dive signing off. It's like we're feeding the very thing we fear.
Right.
Giving it more power.
It is kind of a paradox, isn't it? Like, are we using these tools to express our anxieties, or are the tools themselves shaping our anxieties?
Whoa.
It's a chicken or the egg situation.
It really is. And you know what? It's not just in art and music either. Think about all the dystopian novels and films out there, like that whole genre is super popular right now.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And a lot of those stories are exploring those same themes, right?
Hmm.
Technological overreach, AI taking over, that kind of stuff.
It's tapping into something that's resonating with a lot of people. It's like those stories are giving us a way to process those anxieties, to kind of play out those worst case scenarios.
Yeah. And maybe, in a way, it helps us feel a little more prepared.
Mm,
Like if it happens, at least we've thought about it.
maybe, yeah. It's like a form of mental rehearsal.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got the art, the music, the literature. It's like,
It's everywhere.
yeah, it's everywhere. It's woven into the fabric of our digital lives.
And maybe those Nunsploitation films, as crazy as they were kind of onto something.
Right. Like they were ahead of their time in a way.
They were dealing with these really fundamental questions about power, control, and the individual versus the institution, themes that are even more relevant now with the rise of technology.
Totally. And just as those films used like exaggeration and satire to make us confront these uncomfortable truths about institutions,
Right.
maybe those unsettling elements in AI art and noise music, maybe they're doing the same thing for us today, but for technology.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful connection. It's like they're saying, hey, pay attention. There's stuff happening here that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, like a warning almost.
A warning, yeah. Or a challenge to think critically about the role technology is playing in our lives.
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether.
Right.
It's about being more aware,
More intentional.
asking questions.
Exactly. And maybe even being a little uncomfortable sometimes.
That's a great point. This has been such a mind-blowing deep dive.
It has been a wild ride.
It really has. I mean, who would have thought that we'd start with a niche film genre from the 1970s and end up exploring these huge questions about the future of humanity and our relationship with technology?
That's the beauty of these deep dives. You never know where they're going to take you.
That's so true. And to our expert, thank you so much for taking us on this journey.
It's been my pleasure, really. I always enjoy these conversations.
And to everyone listening out there, we hope this has sparked some interesting thoughts and maybe even a little bit of healthy anxiety.
Just a little.
Remember, those unsettling feelings, they could be a sign that you're on to something important. So keep those minds open, keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.